When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, our west coast became a potential combat zone. Living in that zone were more than 100,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 of them American citizens, 1/3 aliens. We knew that some among them were potentially dangerous. Most were loyal. But no one knew what would happen among this concentrated population if Japanese forces should try to invade our shores. Military authorities therefore determined that all of them, citizens and aliens alike, would have to move.
As we all know, World War II was a world war full of death, disease, and conflict. During World War II, the U.S. took action upon the Japanese Americans in efforts to relocate the Japanese out of America. The U.S. took action of relocating the Japanese 2 months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, February 19, 1942. Franklin D. Roosevelt, our president during World War II, relocated approximately 120,000 people to the internment camps. This act of holding Japanese Americans in internment camps majorly violated the people's civil rights.
The Japanese Americans were ordered to evacuate the West Coast. A lot of their evacuation had to do with race prejudice. Many of the Japanese being evacuated would post signs on their homes and stores saying, "I'm American." America, in this sense, had done wrong. If the Japanese were living in America and were American citizens, they had the right to be there. Why are they being evacuated? About 62% of the Japanese in the internment camps were United States citizens.
General of the Western Defense Command determined that all Japanese within the coastal area should move inland. Immediately the Army began mapping evacuation areas and for a time encouraged the Japanese to leave voluntarily. But trouble for the voluntary evacuees soon threatened in their new locations. So the program was quickly put on a planned and protected basis. Thereafter, the American citizen Japanese and Japanese aliens made their plans in accordance with Army orders. Notices were posted. All persons of Japanese descent were required to register.
After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, many Japanese Americans were believed to be spies. Agencies such as the FBI conducted surveillance in Japanese American communities. Custodial detention lists were lists of those citizens that should be arrested if war came. These lists helped the government round up people known as enemy aliens hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Most of them were men that were priests of Buddhist temples, heads of Japanese association branches, and community leaders with strong Japanese ties. Some were sent to the internment camps, often encountering both German and Italian people.
On February 19, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066. This order gave the Army power to deport Japanese Americans, Italian Americans, and German Americans, or put them into internment camps. The wartime Civil Control Administration created assembly centers and reception centers to house Japanese Americans. They ended up removing Japanese Americans from their communities with over 100 exclusion orders. The FBI also conducted house raids looking for contraband, or anything that showed a special connection to their former homeland.
When being evacuated, many families had to sell their homes, stores, and assets. The properties and stores typically were sold at a fraction of their actual value. The citizens also only had anywhere from a few days to a week to evacuate before they were sent to assembly centers and then to actual camps. And when the camps were not yet completed, many of the evacuees were held in temporary centers, which were usually stables at racetracks.
Even though the conditions in these camps were nothing like the concentration camps in Germany, they weren't the best. It was always very cold in the winter and scorching hot in the summer. The barracks were mostly made of wood, and people had little privacy and had to be with complete strangers. More often than not, families would be in separate barracks and even completely different camps. Not all Japanese Americans remained in these camps. The Department of Justice reviewed individual cases and granted parole to some internees. Some internees also pursued legal means to fight for due process, avoid repatriation, and had to be released. But being released was not a very common thing. If you had tried to escape, you would be shot on the spot. Resisting orders and treason was also punishable by death. Guards would face little to no consequence for killing without just cause. This would go on for years until 1948. The Department of Justice closed the last internment camp and released the remaining internees.
But even when all the camps were closed, many of the internees could not go back to where they previously lived. In their hometowns, residents posted signs telling the evacuees never to return. On February 19, 1976, President Gerald R. Ford terminated the executive order with the Proclamation 4417. And in 1988, Congress awarded each surviving internee $20,000 in reparations.
We arrested thousands of innocent first-generation and second-generation immigrants from Japan, and in total we interned roughly 120,000 Japanese Americans. More than two-thirds were American citizens and around half were children. Overall, Japanese internment was a life-changing event of the Japanese and Japanese Americans during World War II. The Americans were completely in the wrong for this action upon the Japanese. We believe in freedom, but is that what we are enforcing?